Okay, now we're going to take a look at some time-lapse tricks for when creating some fast-moving scenes, and some things you should take into consideration while you're making sort of a time-lapse scene. Let's go up to Display Timeline, just so we can work with a little bit of an animation here. I'm going to go ahead and bump this up to about 7, and we're not going to create a keyframe just yet, but we're just going to take a look at that timing, and 7 seconds seems like it should be alright. So we're going to go back to frame 0, and we're going to load in an atmosphere first. So we're going to load in just a nice sunrise or sunset, and I'm going to go ahead and select the vanilla sky preset, and that'll give us a nice sunrise there. What I'm going to go ahead and do is grab our sun and bring it just below the horizon, so that the sun is gone, and it's just the starting to peek out. And I'm going to edit our camera just a little. I'm going to deselect our sun so we can edit the camera independent from the sun's position. I'm just going to set that up just a little. And now what I'm going to go ahead and do is bring our slider up to that 7 seconds. And we're going to raise our sun up. So we'll select it. I'm just going to bring it up a little bit out of view. A very bright sky now with our sun risen that high. We're just going to watch it as it goes down and see how it affects everything. Okay, and so we're going to need to make some adjustments once we get to that higher level. But one thing we do want to do is we're going to bring it about to center of the animation, which is going to be about 3.5 seconds. And I'm going to go ahead and just give us a little bit more movement. Because our sun doesn't move straight, it will sort of curve. And this way it's a little bit more realistic, where we have it kind of curving across the sky. I'm going to keep that lens flare in there because it looks pretty neat. So we don't have to really worry about removing that unless you want to. We'll just watch this. Another thing is we're going to have to animate our clouds because our clouds are moving, or well, not moving. And that's one thing we have to keep in mind when we're creating a little time-lapse scene is making sure that our clouds move. So I'm going to go back to the front of the animation, and I'm going to pull up our atmosphere editor. We're going to take a look at our clouds. And now what I want to do is actually go ahead to the end of the animation so we can create our keyframes for cloud movement. And depending on the direction, we'll have to take a look and see exactly how we want our clouds to be moving, but we'll just leave it at 0 degrees right now. We want to up our velocity, so we're going up to 2. We're also going to increase our rate of change since we're creating something that's a rather quick animation, and we want to have a lot of movement in our clouds. And this is pretty much going to cover just our large cumulus, but we want to do this for all of them. And what we could also do is make some variations. We have our stratus clouds with this specific scene, where I'm going to bring our velocity down just a little because those won't be moving as quickly as the rest of them because they're a lot higher up. And for the cumulus, just make it just a little bit different. And that way we have clouds moving on different layers at different speeds, so it's not all completely the same. I'm going to click OK. We'll take a look at our cloud movement just to get a basic idea of how everything is moving and how quickly it is moving. And that looks like it should be alright where we're at right now. Okay, we're just dragging in here and just to watch our animation from the start and then kind of move our way across. And now this brightness in the sky we might want to adjust just a little depending, of course, if we're going to be working with a fixed camera where we have sort of the same amount or the same kind of f-stop on there. This of course would be happening because we have a very dim scene to capture that light for the sun. And then for real time lapse we wouldn't probably have an automatic exposure on, so this would of course overexpose itself once it reaches this point in the sky, but we can compensate for that with just a little bit of an adjustment. So let's go up to our atmosphere editor. We're going to take a look at our light, and what we could do is just adjust our light intensity and we have it set to bright right now. But once we get to this point in the animation, we want to make it a little bit darker. So we'll just bring that down and take a look at our preview once it brings up. And that way we kind of have a little bit of an automatic exposure on that lens. And that looks like it should be okay. We still got some definition in there, and everything overall looks pretty good. We could adjust the light color if we wanted, the ambient color as we're changing from the day. We can also make our ambient light a little bit more from the sky, and our light balance a little bit more ambient once we reach that certain time of the day, because of course those will be changing, and we don't want it all to be exactly the same. We want to nice lighten this up quite a bit while we're doing making our changes. We'll just get a preview here. It's starting to look pretty good. Yeah, and so pretty much the sky is finished. But other things we want to keep in mind for the scene is if we have plants. Let's go ahead and add a tree in. Just right mouse click to select a species, and we'll just grab our maple tree. And we have to keep wind in mind while we're working on a time lapse. So let's just pretend we have a bunch of different trees here, and I'm going to go ahead and size that up just a little so we can see it just a little bit better. And we have to keep wind in mind because that's going to be rather important. We don't want to have our tree standing perfectly still while we're having a time lapse. We want it to have a little bit of animation to it, a little bit of movement. So what we're going to do is first go to our atmosphere editor and make sure that we have enable wind on a per plant basis on and enable breeze. And click OK. And that will give us our leaf fluttering that we want. But we want it to be very quick. We want, of course, we're spanning a couple of hours here within 7 seconds. So these leaves are going to be fluttering very, very quickly. So we need the effect on this plant to be rather high. So we're going to double click and go into our plant editor and go to our response to wind options. And what we have to do is up this, depending on how long the time lapse is. It's pretty much going to be a little bit of trial and error. Unless, of course, you do it a bunch of times, you can make yourself a little chart so you know how quickly you want things to move. But we're going to do sensitivity of leaves to breeze, and we're going to up that to 20. And then overall sensitivity of trunk and branches, I'm going to up that to 20 as well. And click OK. So now throughout the animation, we're going to have our leaves fluttering very, very quickly as they would. But we also want a little bit of movement within the actual tree itself. Now, if you have multiple trees, you can turn off the per plant basis and go ahead and just have an overall effect on maybe an ecosystem, and you can still get that fluttering. But if you want to have more of a dramatic effect, we'll have to use the wind options per plant, and I'm just going to do it for this one right now. I'm going to go back to the beginning of the animation. I'm going to click on the top view where we can get our wind controller. And what I want to do is just kind of adjust this back and forth every couple of frames so that we have the tree sort of vibrating back and forth. So I'm just going to pull this up just one little notch and then go to our next frame, and we can pull it back down and go to our next frame, and we can pull that, and then just throughout each of our frames here just make an adjustment because we do not want too many major changes here, and we don't want it flowing too much. We want it a very rapid sort of blowing back and forth very quickly. So every couple of frames go in and change that. As you can see, the rest of the animation is sort of moving, and we do have it sort of whipping around already by itself. So what you pretty much want to do is just try to go in frame by frame now that we've made those first couple of changes and set each next frame to back to the center. You can pretty much do this with every other frame, and you don't want to do it with every frame. But this will create that nice vibration that we need, where we have a nice time span over our tree. And right now it's kind of flowing, but we can kind of see it's going back and forth. And that might not be quick enough. Of course, I'm only working with about 15 frames per second, and normally you want to be working with at least 30 for a nice fluid movement. So that'll give you more frames as well to work with to make it vibrate a little bit more. So that should not be a problem. Like I said, per plant, you'll have to pretty much do this if you want the overall vibration of each plant. Otherwise, you could just do on an ecosystem, you can just make the leaves affected more. You could also create a custom plant that is highly affected by the wind and save that off so that you can use that for your ecosystem. I'm just going to go ahead and do just a quick little animation preview, even though we don't have the tree really moving around properly during this part of the animation. I'll just go ahead and render that really quick. Just go to animation preview so we can just get a little sample of it down in the bottom here. Mostly just to take a look at the sky and see how that's going to look. We can already see right now that maybe the sun isn't going to be bright enough. So you might want to adjust the intensity of the overall flare of the sun. You could adjust the lens flare for it, so that right when it gets up above the horizon, you can have it peek out, which will be kind of a neat effect. And I'm just going to go ahead and wait for this to finish rendering. Okay, we can see the final render now, and this is not playing at the same speed as the recording, so I'm going to go ahead and hit stop just so we can watch it frame by frame and just kind of see the animation scrolling across. And I'll do it slowly so it matches up. We can see we have some nice cloud moving in there, some very fast clouds moving across, and that's pretty much correct, the way that's moving. And the speed seems to sync up. If you notice our tree, it is swaying a little bit too much towards the end, but if you look at the beginning where we made those frames, you can see it does flutter a little correctly, where it's going back and forth very quickly, as it would. And although at this size we can't really tell the leaf fluttering, they are moving very, very quickly because we had that sensitivity cranked up.